My husband died at sea while saving his true love. By the time I was notified, his body had almost been entirely devoured by fish. The staff asked if I still wanted to retrieve the body. With a wave of my hand, I firmly refused to waste public resources. Armed with the certificate from the police, I immediately proceeded to cancel my husband's household registration. After contacting my husband's lawyer, I finally couldn't hold back my laughter. Late at night, I opened a bottle of champagne. What was originally only half the assets I could claim had now become 2/3. I had to celebrate. My husband Nathan was dead. He had taken his true love Mandy on a ferry cruise, encountered waves, the boat hit a reef, and he gave the chance to survive to Mandy, perishing at sea himself. When the police notified me, he had been gnawed by sharks to the point where his head was gone. The headless body floated on the water. Originally, a few fishermen wanted to retrieve it, but then another shark came, snatched it, and swam away. So they only salvaged Nathan's wallet and phone. As a prominent entrepreneur in the city, everyone wanted to recover Nathan's body. The police asked if I needed a rescue team to search for it. With a wave of my hand, I said, "No need." I firmly refused to waste public resources. An hour later, I took the certificate from the police to cancel his registration. The staff, upon seeing his ID, even shed a couple of tears. "Mr. Nathan was a great man, madam, please accept my condolences." I burst into laughter. She was right, Nathan was a great man. In a couple of days, he was supposed to go with me to get the divorce certificate and then marry Mandy. But he died instead, leaving me a huge inheritance. Without a body, I could only burn some of Nathan's belongings to serve as ashes. So I burned the useless waste paper from his company office, along with his personal items. After burning, I put the ashes into a plastic bag, thinking to buy an urn tomorrow. I contacted the lawyer and began liquidating Nathan's assets: 6 companies, 8 cars, 66 storefronts, 88 properties, plus gold bars in the bank, and funds and stocks on hand. While I was calculating how many zeros all this amounted to, the lawyer told me, among them, 2 properties were transferred to Miss Mandy by Mr. Nathan while he was alive. What? I wouldn't allow anyone to ruin my auspicious numbers. I turned to the lawyer and asked, "The things Nathan gave her, I should be able to reclaim them, right?" As expected from a lawyer earning millions annually, he understood immediately. That same day, data was recovered from Nathan's water-damaged phone, and by afternoon, my lawyer's letter was express delivered to Mandy's home. When Mandy arrived, I had just opened a bottle of champagne. She directly picked up a glass and splashed it at my face. "Maggie, what do you mean by sending that lawyer's letter?" I dodged to the side, and the liquid from the glass spilled entirely onto the carpet. My Italian handmade carpet. I looked at Mandy with a pained expression. "This counts too, you'll compensate me for it along with everything else later." "Who gave you the courage to demand these things from me?" "These were all given to me by Nathan. We were about to get married, so they're all mine." "Miss Mandy, do you understand the law?" I sneered. "The things Nathan gave you belong to our marital community property. I have the right to demand their return." Mandy's face turned pale as she took out her phone. "You definitely didn't discuss this with Nathan. I'll call him right now, and you wait, he won't let you off." Seeing this, I laughed. "Don't bother calling, it won't go through. Nathan is in a shark's belly." Mandy's eyebrows and eyes twisted together. "Maggie, you're too vicious. After all, you two were husband and wife, do you have to curse him like this?" I waited for her to finish shouting, then took out Nathan's ID card, cut into 2 pieces, from my bag. "What? You don't believe me? This is his ID, I just cut it this morning." Mandy looked at the 2 halves of the ID, stunned for a moment, but still unbelieving. "You must be playing some trick. I'll call him right now, and you won't get a single cent." She dialed a few numbers on her phone, and soon the phone in my bag rang. I took out Nathan's phone from my bag. The screen displayed the word wife. Mandy's face turned ashen in an instant. "Why is his phone with you?" "I told you he's dead." "Then where's the body?" "Eaten by sharks." I spread my hands. "Miss Mandy, haven't you forgotten that you 2 went on the cruise together? How come only you returned?" I thought. Mandy squatted down directly, her whole body starting to tremble, her eyes turned red instantly, and tears fell like pearls. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. My Italian handmade carpet tears are dirty too, you know. Mandy cried for a while, then suddenly stood up and ran toward the pillar in the living room. Nathan, I'll die with you. Frightened, I quickly retreated a few steps, picked up my phone, and dialed. Comrade police, come quickly, someone is attempting suicide in my home. The police arrived soon, understood the situation, and took Mandy away. As she was leaving, I didn't forget to remind her, remember to return my things, or I'll sue. One of the police officers glanced at me sideways, his expression seeming to say, she's like this, and you're still provoking her. I shrugged, that's several million anyone would be anxious. The next day, I began planning Nathan's funeral. After all, he had so many wealthy relatives, and over the past 2 years, I had given them red envelopes. Now it was time to reap the rewards. I notified a bunch of Nathan's relatives and hired a master to select a burial site with me. But I didn't like the feng shui treasures the master recommended. I preferred the one at the very edge, barren, with nothing growing. The master said, no, if buried there, your husband's descendants will live in hardship. I clapped my hands, that's perfect, this one it is, the feng shui is so good, and it's cheap. Anyway, Nathan and I had no children, so there would be no descendants. After buying the burial plot and urn, I hired a funeral company and arranged a quite grand funeral for Nathan. At the funeral, while pretending to cry, I glanced at the condolence money. As expected from wealthy people, the envelopes were getting thicker and thicker, so thick that I almost laughed out loud. As the funeral was nearing its end, Mandy arrived. Dressed in black, she held the hand of a 7 or 8-year-old boy and walked directly toward Nathan's photo. The already quiet funeral site became even quieter, everyone's eyes and ears perked up. Lucas, Mandy's voice sounded weak, kneel down. This is your father. As the boy was about to kneel, I ran over and helped him up. Little one, you can't just claim anyone as your father. Mandy panicked, he is my son with Nathan. Oh, I lowered my eyelids, if you say so, but I don't believe it. Who can prove it? We can prove it. 2 more people appeared at the door, my long unseen mother-in-law and father-in-law. Maggie, you bitch. As soon as my mother-in-law saw me, she lunged forward, my son died, and you notified everyone except us. What are your intentions? How could I let her hit me? I stepped back, waved my hand, and immediately someone came to stop her. I said from the side, Mom, wasn't it you who told me not to contact you unless I died? It seemed my mother-in-law had forgotten. That year, she drove me out of the house and said that to me. You poisonous woman, my son must have been killed by you. Doing such despicable things for money, you won't die a good death. My mother-in-law kept charging toward me, probably wanting to scratch my face. Fortunately, the bodyguards I hired were capable, holding her tightly without leaving any gap. Mom, you must know how Nathan died. He was with Mandy. Lucas, come call Grandpa and Grandma. Mandy interrupted me directly, pulling the child over. My mother-in-law immediately bent down to touch the child's face. This is our Xiong family's grandson, he looks exactly like Nathan when he was young. Saying that, she looked at Mandy. Mandy, you've suffered so much these years, raising the child alone. Watching this family recognition scene, I felt a bit nauseous. I kindly reminded, Mom, you believe everything she says? We don't even know whose child this is. Upon hearing this, Mandy got angry. Maggie, are you saying this child isn't Nathan's? I tell you, this child is mine and Nathan's. When we broke up, I was already pregnant, and these years I've been living with the child. My mother-in-law chimed in, this child is obviously our Xiong family's seed, you wicked woman, can't have children yourself and jealous of others who do. Seeing my mother-in-law fully on her side, Mandy became bolder. She began sobbing about how hard it had been raising the child these years, how much discrimination a single mother faces. Oh, is that so? I mercilessly exposed her. How come I heard you married someone abroad and were dumped for cheating? You're talking nonsense. Mandy's eyes filled with tears, she turned to my mother-in-law. I can endure it myself, but the child without a father is truly pitiful. My mother-in-law was moved and cursed at me. Maggie, you hen that can't lay eggs, you've never been a mother, so you wouldn't understand. I understand, Mandy. I said faintly, Mom, even if this child is really Nathan's, there needs to be evidence, otherwise, anyone could bring a child and claim it's your grandson. Would you recognize them all? I have evidence. Mandy straightened her back. Initially, Nathan didn't believe Lucas was his child, so he did a paternity test. Now that report is still in his office drawer. Mom, go look and you'll know. Oh. It hadn't even started, and she had already changed her address. Not just me, everyone present had expressions that were quite intriguing. This funeral was truly lively, everyone was engaged. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law quickly sent someone to Nathan's office to fetch the paternity report. I blocked again. Mom, let's wait until the funeral is over to discuss this. With so many people here, making a scene wouldn't look good. My mother-in-law snorted coldly. What? Maggie, are you afraid that once the paternity report comes out, this child will compete with you for the inheritance? I tell you, be more generous. If I were in your position, I would definitely recognize Lucas. I couldn't persuade her at all. After Mandy specified the exact location of the paternity report, someone soon went to Nathan's company. I also took the opportunity to make a phone call. In less than half an hour, that person returned. As soon as she saw him, Mandy rushed forward. How is it? Did you get it? The person looked troubled. No. How is that possible? Mandy screamed. Did you not search properly? I searched everywhere, the people at the company said. The person answered while glancing at me. You don't need to fear her. My mother-in-law noticed the clue. What did the company people say? They said the madam had burned those things long ago. Oh, blame me. I stepped forward. I was afraid of being reminded of him by his things, so I burned all of Nathan's belongings, but I didn't see any paternity report inside. Mandy's face darkened, and she lunged at me to hit me. Maggie, you poisonous woman. You did it on purpose. You don't want my son to return to the Xiong family. Her appearance was terrifying, scaring my bodyguards to quickly stand in front of me. Mandy, don't act like a mad dog. Not to mention I didn't see that paternity report. Even if I did, how would you prove it's real? You didn't even retrieve Nathan's body. How can I prove it's real? Mandy shouted at the top of her lungs. Maggie, you're truly petty. You want to monopolize Nathan's inheritance. My mother-in-law originally didn't know that I had refused to retrieve Nathan's body from the sea. With her crying like this, everyone now knew. My mother-in-law's face darkened. Why didn't you retrieve my son? You couldn't even let him rest in peace. On what basis do you inherit his assets? On the basis that I'm his wife. I smiled. Mom, why are you speaking for an outsider? She is my grandson's mother. She's not an outsider. You can't even lay an egg. You're the outsider. Return all my son's money. Mom, I called to the frantic mother-in-law. Do you know why I haven't had children all these years? Isn't it because you've done too many bad things and can't conceive? Indeed can't conceive, I sneered coldly, but it's not me who can't. What do you mean? My mother-in-law was stunned. Could it be my son? Yes, it's Nathan who couldn't conceive. I clapped my hands, and immediately someone handed me a file bag. Family scandals shouldn't be aired. I originally didn't plan to say it, but since you keep forcing me, I can only apologize to Nathan. Inside are his medical reports from the past 10 years. 10 years ago, he lost his fertility. How could Mandy have a child with him? My mother-in-law opened the file bag, and the papers fell out. Mandy picked up the papers, looked them over repeatedly, her face instantly pale, shaking her head continuously. Impossible, this is fake. There are hospital stamps on these. If you don't believe it, you can verify at the hospital. I saw Mandy try to grab my mother-in-law's hand again, but she was flung away by my mother-in-law, who was frowning at the medical reports. I pretended to shed a few tears, turned to the relatives. Sorry for letting everyone watch the spectacle. The funeral ends here. Everyone can leave. As everyone left, their faces were filled with the joy of having witnessed a shocking scandal, eager to share it. I no longer bothered with those three, put on my sunglasses, and left. A few days later, I received a lawyer's letter from Mandy. It stated regarding the division of Nathan's inheritance, that Mandy's child should also have a share, and Mandy had filed a lawsuit in court. A few days later, I received a notice for pre-trial mediation, requiring me to arrive on time. Upon receiving it, I was furious. I directly called my lawyer to question why my lawsuit against Mandy hadn't gone to trial yet, but hers against me was mediating first. The lawyer explained for a long time, but I didn't understand much. The gist was two systems, and it was normal for hers to be processed first. I attended the pre-trial mediation unhappily. Mandy said, "Lucas is Nathan's child." I said, "Nathan couldn't conceive, I have the medical report." "Your medical report says low sperm motility, but that doesn't mean zero motility. The doctor said there's a possibility of conception." Mandy looked smug, with a smile in her eyes. "Please check properly next time." "Oh, so what?" I yawned lazily. "Do you have evidence proving this child is Nathan's?" "Of course." Mandy slapped a paper on the table. "This is the paternity test between Lucas and his grandfather. It proves my son has a blood relation with Nathan's father, and Nathan's father has only Nathan as a child, so Lucas is the Sion family's child." I glanced at the lawyer, who kindly reminded her, "This doesn't count." My mother-in-law slapped the table. "How doesn't it count?" "Maggie, you're too narrow-minded. This child is my son's seed. Inheriting my son's money is rightful even if illegitimate, so what? It's normal for men to have a few outside. Besides, this child is not only Nathan's but also yours. In a way, having a child is so fortunate." I smiled. "Mom, don't get excited. The court wants a paternity test. What's paternity? It's between father and son. Besides, Mom, don't you really know? Actually, Dad has another son." My mother-in-law was stunned. I directly took out a paternity report. "Originally, I didn't want to say it, but I didn't expect you to help an outsider, so I won't hide it for father-in-law anymore. This is what father-in-law asked Nathan to handle before. It's the paternity report for his other child with him." I took out photos and videos again. "These are photos and videos of that child. Now he and his mom Celine live in my father-in-law's villa in the south of the city. My father-in-law goes twice a week, with a bunch of nannies and bodyguards there, and the chefs are state banquet masters. I've eaten there once, TSK, that flavor." The more I said, the darker my mother-in-law's face became. I didn't forget to advise her, "Mother-in-law, you mustn't be narrow-minded. It's normal for men to have a few outside. This child isn't just my father-in-law's but also yours. Having a child is so fortunate." I returned the words my mother-in-law had said to me verbatim. Seeing her completely lose it, slapping the table and wanting to leave, I laughed uncontrollably and said to her back, "Leaving already? The mediation isn't over yet." My mother-in-law left. Mandy, seeing she was at a disadvantage, pinched her thigh, and tears fell. "Sister Maggie, I know Nathan and I did wrong by you. You have resentment in your heart, but as you can see, Lucas looks exactly like Nathan. How could he not be his child? For the sake of the many years you were with Nathan, leave something for his child." Her words were said so pitifully that everyone in the room was somewhat moved. I began to understand why Nathan became reckless upon seeing her. This face was too suited for playing the victim. But she chose the wrong target for pity. I sneered coldly, still the same words, "How do you prove that the child is Nathan's?" This mediation was successful because Mandy withdrew the lawsuit. Even if she didn't withdraw, there was no way unless she fished Nathan out of the sea. Otherwise, even the King of Heaven couldn't prove that boy was Nathan's. After returning home, I drew a hot bath for myself. After washing comfortably, I called Grace, who was working as a nanny at Nathan's father's place. Grace vividly described on the phone how my mother-in-law, upon returning, directly confronted my father-in-law, fought with him, and threatened to make the mistress pay. Seeing the matter exposed, my father-in-law stopped pretending and directly told my mother-in-law to divorce. Now he only had that one child and planned to give all his assets to the mistress's son. My mother-in-law cried, made a scene, and threatened to hang herself at home. My father-in-law directly went to Celine's place. My mother-in-law was used to lording it over at home, so Grace and the other nannies didn't like her much. Thus, when saying these things, Grace laughed very loudly. Finally, Grace asked me, "So, with your father-in-law cheating, will he leave with nothing?" I told her, "Watch less TV, cheating doesn't lead to leaving with nothing." Even when Nathan divorced me and decided to give me half the assets, that was out of conscience. I thought my mother-in-law probably wouldn't divorce my father-in-law. After all, he wouldn't give her half the assets. But what I didn't expect was that my mother-in-law actually divorced my father-in-law. However, he had long transferred his assets, so she only got one villa. Unable to swallow her anger, my mother-in-law stormed to my father-in-law's South City villa and beat up the mistress. Unexpectedly, the mistress directly called the police. My mother-in-law spent a few days in detention and ended up compensating with that villa. Now my mother-in-law barely subsists on Nathan's inheritance, but it can't support her extravagant lifestyle as a wealthy madam, so I heard she's recently looking for projects to invest in and earn some pension money for herself. Watching the drama, my lawsuit against Mandy to return the assets finally went to trial. There was no suspense in this case. Naturally, I won. However, a month after winning, Mandy still hadn't returned my money and properties. She must lack manpower to move so many things. No choice. Being kind-hearted, I directly hired a large truck, drove over, and brought a few guys to knock on the door. Mandy held the door shut. "Maggie, this is trespassing." I found a stool to sit. "Don't pin false charges on me. The court has awarded this house to me. Entering my own home isn't trespassing. Come out quickly, or I'll smash the door. If you dare smash the door, I'll call the police." I said, "Fine, call the police quickly, see if they make you leave or me." Naturally, Mandy didn't dare call the police. If she did, she'd definitely be the one to leave. Just as we were in a stalemate, a black stretched Lincoln stopped behind us. I turned to look. This was my father-in-law's car. In less than a minute, my father-in-law got out of the car. Seeing my setup, he frowned and asked, "What's going on?" "Dad, she wants to drive me out." With my father-in-law's arrival, Mandy opened the door. She stood beside him, tears in her eyes. "Quickly control this mad woman." I tilted my head looking at them. What a bizarre scene. Why was Mandy so intimate with my father-in-law? My relationship with him wasn't great, but it wasn't as bad as with my mother-in-law. But after hearing Mandy's words, he actually turned to me. "What's wrong with you? Instead of staying home properly, you come every day to bully this widow and orphan. What skill is that?" I hadn't spoken yet when Mandy said, "She wants to rob my house." I said, "How is this your house? The court has ruled, you have to move out." My father-in-law grew more confused, so Mandy tearfully embellished the story. My father-in-law got angry. "This is my son's house, he can give it to whomever he wants. On what basis do you demand it back?" I used to think only my mother-in-law was unreasonable. I didn't expect my father-in-law to be even more of a rogue. Fortunately, I wasn't afraid of him at all. I rolled my eyes. "This house was bought after Nathan and I married. It's our marital property. He gave it to her without my consent, so I can reclaim it. The court awarded it to me. What's the use of you disagreeing? If not, we can litigate again." My father-in-law was intimidated by my demeanor. Mandy looked aggrieved at my father-in-law. "Dad, I have no money. If I return the money and house to her, how will Lucas and I live?" My father-in-law pondered for a moment, spread his hands to me. "How much?" "I'll pay for her." Hearing this, I was very surprised. I took out the ledger from my bag. My father-in-law looked page by page, finally with a livid face. "Maggie, have you gone mad with poverty? Even a 1 yuan bottle of mineral water is included." I also acted aggrieved. "Even a small fly is meat. This money is all my hard-earned." After reviewing the ledger, my father-in-law threw it to his secretary. "Transfer the money to her later." I quickly thanked. "Thank you, Dad." "Nathan is dead, don't call me Dad." "All right, thank you, Uncle." My father-in-law looked at Mandy and said to her, "Move to my place today, return this house to her." Mandy wanted to say something, but my father-in-law glanced at her and said very dominantly, "My place is better than here. Lucas is my biological grandson. Even if the law doesn't recognize it, I do. My will definitely includes his name." Mandy thought about it and obediently made space for me. She wasn't stupid. after all, my father-in-law's assets were several times Nathan's. Watching her happily load things onto the car, I kindly reminded, Mandy, there's no free lunch, I advise you to think carefully before moving there. Mandy's mouth curled up wildly, you're just sour grapes because you can't have them, after all, no matter how rich Nathan was, he was just a second-generation rich. How can he compare to his old man? Pity you have no child, even if the old man has an accident, you won't get a cent of the assets. After Mandy finished packing everything, she generously invited me to inspect the house. I sat on the sofa without moving and suddenly asked her, Mandy, before you went abroad, you already knew you were pregnant, right? Nathan's family liked you so much, and you two loved each other so deeply. Why did you separate? I remember when Mandy just returned to the country, Nathan didn't sleep that whole night, tossing and turning in bed checking his phone, afraid of missing any message. This sentence must have touched Mandy's sore spot. She withdrew her smile, looking somewhat panicked on her face. What does this have to do with you? Nathan is dead, why are you inquiring about this? I smiled, nothing, just feel like you'll come back begging me. Mandy laughed loudly as if hearing a joke. It's not certain who will beg whom. Half a year later, Mandy indeed came. She knelt before me, crying hoarsely, Maggie, please save my son, only you can save him. She crawled toward me, grabbing my pant leg, Nathan's dad wants to kill him and has imprisoned him, I really have no way, please help me. I sipped my tea and asked, what's going on? It turned out my father-in-law's current child was ill and needed a kidney transplant, but my father-in-law didn't match, Mandy's child's genes did match, so that's why he took her to his villa. At first, Mandy thought she was elevated by her son, but the situation gradually spiraled out of her control. Her child always had inexplicable injuries, even walking on the road, there would be falling objects from high places until Mandy learned that my father-in-law's child needed a kidney transplant. She understood the abnormalities during this time. She originally wanted to take the child and leave, but my father-in-law noticed. He used bodyguards to stop the child and directly drove her out. Then you shouldn't beg me, you should report to the police. I sincerely suggested. I did report, it was useless. Mandy cried. When the police went, my father-in-law's attitude became very good, even allowing her to take the child, but Mandy's son had been spoiled by my father-in-law during this time, knowing that leaving Grandpa wouldn't mean such a good life, and refused to leave no matter what. So I can only come to you. Mandy had tears and snot all over, please help us, after all, Lucas is Nathan's flesh and blood. Why should I help? This is your and Nathan's child, not mine and Nathan's. I adopted an indifferent attitude. Unexpectedly, Mandy said, because Nathan loved you. Mandy told me that the person Nathan always loved was actually me. His decision to divorce me and be with Mandy, doing those things to disgust me, was because he had a terminal illness. Nathan didn't have much time left, he didn't want to hold you back. Mandy recounted Nathan's love for me, but I listened without much emotional fluctuation. I knew he loved me. I also knew he was dying. After all, drinking and clubbing every day, relying on pills to maintain energy, how could he not get sick? Not taking medicine when sick, how could he not die? I fetched Nathan's annual medical reports for him, I knew his health better than he did. So what? I sneered, does that mean I should save your son? Mandy didn't expect me to be so cold-blooded, realizing belatedly, you don't love Nathan at all. Far from it, I hated him. Mandy despaired, no one but me could help her. She also went to my mother-in-law, but recently my mother-in-law had invested and lost her last bit of money. She went daily to ask my father-in-law for money. Now was the time to curry favor with him, how could she offend him? Lucas, what to do? Mom can't save you. Mandy pounded her chest in grief. I watched her go crazy for a while, then spoke again, Mandy, do you remember I asked you why you separated from Nathan back then? Mandy's tears stopped, If you tell me the truth, I can consider saving your son. Mandy bit her lip, a few minutes later, as if resolved, because that year, Nathan hit and killed someone. That day, Nathan took Mandy to the mountain to watch stars. On the way back, they encountered heavy rain, and Nathan hit and killed someone. That woman lay on the ground in a bloody mess. But Nathan was terrifyingly calm. He first sent Mandy home before handling the matter. Mandy thought Nathan would go to prison for this, so the next day she broke up with him and, with family help, went abroad. Struggling abroad, she returned and found Nathan not only hadn't gone to prison but had become richer, so she shamelessly clung to him again. Listening to these words, my hands trembled, but my voice was terribly low. Do you know how he handled the body later? I asked Nathan. He said he compensated the family a large sum, and it was fine. Damn it, he's bullshitting. I directly smashed the cup in my hand on the ground, glass shards flying everywhere. Mandy looked at me in astonishment, as if suddenly understanding something. Mandy, help me with something, and I'll get your son out for you, how about it? Mandy, looking at my gloomy face, retreated a bit but finally nodded. 2 days later, Mandy went to the police station to report that Nathan had once hit and run. The police, upon hearing, only filed the case. After all, Nathan was dead, and even if not reported back then, they didn't know how to investigate. However, that night, a heavy rain fell, and a pile of bones washed out from the midslope of Camel Mountain. After police confirmation, these bones belonged to a rural woman named Joanna at the foot of Camel Mountain. 8 years ago, her family had reported her missing, and this pile was only part of her body. This was a major case. The city specially formed an investigation team. Later, someone went to the Public Security Bureau, saying that 8 years ago on a rainy day, they saw a car hit someone on Camel Mountain and then leave. Although the rain was heavy, they remembered the license plate. The police checked the number. The owner of that car 8 years ago was the city's outstanding entrepreneur, Nathan. 2 weeks later, Nathan's parents were arrested for aiding their son in hit and run and cruelly disposing of the victim's body. They threw parts to the mountain, river, and garbage dump. Too much time had passed, only the mountain part remained. Thus, the whole truth came to light. And 2 days later, I went to the Public Security Bureau to collect Joanna's ashes. Holding the urn, I sobbed uncontrollably. At that moment, someone else came. A woman dressed in black sat down beside me. She reached out to touch the urn, tears falling too. Mom, your daughters have avenged you. I looked at Celine's face, lips trembling, and called her, sister. Celine hugged me, stroking my back. Everything is over. Joanna was my mother. That year, Dad had a high fever. It was raining heavily outside. Mom went out to find a doctor. But once she left, she never returned. Dad also died in the hospital without timely treatment. In an instant, our family's world collapsed. After burying Dad, my sister and I searched everywhere for Mom. Eventually, we heard someone had seen a luxury car hit my mom. When asked, that person said they missaw, perhaps not. I knew he was afraid of trouble. So using some legal means, my sister found out the car's license plate. We investigated and investigated, tracing it to Nathan. From the beginning, I married Nathan to investigate the truth of Mom's death. So I didn't care what kind of person he was, didn't care about him with other women. Lurking for 2 years, from Nathan's sleep talk, I finally pieced together Mom's whereabouts. I wanted to sue him but had no evidence. So my sister started contacting Nathan's dad. Nathan deserved to die. Even if he hadn't perished at sea, he would die from illness. If not illness, I would eventually send him to prison. In the end, the Sion couple was sentenced to death. The remaining Sion family assets were all inherited by my sister's child. My sister's child ultimately didn't find a suitable kidney donor and died in the spring of the following year. After learning this news, Mandy, unseen for a long time, jumped out again. Holding the previous paternity report, she kept saying her child was related to the Sion family and demanded a share of the assets. Unfortunately, my sister isn't me. Competing for assets with her requires strength. My sister wouldn't indulge Mandy like that. She just said one sentence, and that crazy woman Mandy quieted down. Do you really think your son's injuries back then were done by Richard? I heard he's just stabilized in elementary school. How about giving him some trouble? Mandy paled. It's a society ruled by law now. What can you do? Can't do much, just make you disgusted. Bullying a child, what skill is that? Fine, bully you. My sister spread her hands. Your family isn't as rich as mine, bankrupting you is easy. Mandy now lived and ate at her parents' home. Upon hearing this, her face turned ashen. No matter how unwilling, she could only obediently leave. But I'm very vengeful, so I contacted Mandy's ex-husband far abroad. Mandy's previous divorce wasn't because she cheated, it was because her ex gambled away all her money. I accidentally revealed to her ex that Mandy now lived at her parents' and they were quite rich. The next day, her ex returned to the country. I didn't hear much about the rest, only that later Mandy and her ex were both driven out of the home. On Qingming Festival, my sister and I went up the mountain to pay respects to our parents. We combined their two graves, which was also Dad's wish. That day the weather was fine, no rain. After kowtowing, a gust of wind blew over. The wind carried an unknown wheat fragrance, the scent on Mom. I thought, perhaps Dad was bringing the lost Mom to visit us.